All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. This is the latest segment of OU Insider. This is a career development event. So basically what we do in these series is we take a shining star, an alumni who is doing great things out there in the big world, and we just really nitpick and learn about their career journey and see how they got here, what their aspirations are. So we're super excited to have Sable Elyse Smith, class of 2011, join us. I'll quickly introduce myself and then I'll let Alan Lowell and Sable Elyse Smith do that as well. My name is Nicole Kang. I am the Employer Relations Manager, and I'm also an alum. I graduated the class of 2013, and she and I actually we overlapped a little
Lots
bit.
of overlap, yes.
Yeah. So it's so great to see your face again. But yeah, go ahead, introduce yourself.
I'm Sable Elyse Smith. On the bottom of my screen, it says I graduated in 2011 because I honestly couldn't remember. And now I live and work in New York City.
Yes, that's the short version.
Well, more questions, I guess.
That's the really short version. Yes, you live and work in New York City. And she's a street sweeper. And it has nothing to do with art. No, I mean, what a story you actually got. And I'm fascinated. I only learned right before this began that you two actually, saw each other one time here, at least. And I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, because you are the art department. So,
I know.
We were art students. You're
Two
the
of our
connecting
best.
thread.
Two of our best. So I have a question for Sable. And I want to also, Nicole, I guess, would people send questions to you in the chat?
Yes, so if you have any questions for Sable, please submit them in the Q&A and we'll answer them live. And then, if you miss any part of it, this will be recorded and made available on our YouTube channel. But yeah, Professor Lowell, will you quickly introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Alan Lowell, and I've been here a long time, even longer than it was that they were here. There are things about Oglethorpe that are fortuitous, and I would say, having had the chance to meet and work with both of these artists, young people, yeah, I guess you're still young. You were younger than I am, so you're young. Was such a pleasure at the time, and it's just a delight to see them on the screen together. Not something I thought would happen. Mm-hmm. And so, Sable, I had a quick question. You were in the very early group, I believe, with David Paterson.
Yes.
Right, and it was like we had sticks and rocks, and we said, go make a movie with sticks and rocks kind of thing.
Yes.
And so it was very bare bones. I remember he brought equipment in to use. Mm-hmm. And back then, even technology's changed so much that I'm pretty sure you couldn't use your phone to make footage.
Definitely not mine.
Right. And was it video back then, actual video?
Yeah, it's funny too, because in David Patterson's class, that's where I obviously first got introduced to video and filmmaking. And I can't remember the name of the shop, but maybe it was like around North Druid Hills or somewhere. There's like a camera store, and I bought my first used
Viterra Theater.
Yes, Viterra Theater. And there's like a Publix over there or something.
Yeah.
I bought my first mini DV camcorder, right?
I remember that.
Was special. So it actually was tape, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I didn't realize you had interest in film studies, but you were an art major, a studio art major?
I was a studio art major, and then I was a person kind of hopping around, taking only the classes that were interesting to me and not following the requirements or any core curriculum. And so then at the end of it, I wrote an independent major to paste all those things together so that I could graduate.
Well, and it worked out, didn't it? Now, you went to Parsons for graduate school.
I went to Parsons for graduate school.
And as I remember, this Parsons, for anybody who doesn't know, Parsons is in New York. It's a very well-known arts graduate program and undergraduate. Mm-hmm. And when you got there, it wasn't quite the program you thought it would be. No. And you had to kind of shape it somehow. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I guess I just had to shape my experience, which is kind of what I learned at Oglethorpe, right? So I took, the painting, drawing, all the classes that Alan taught. I got introduced to David Patterson and could do like weird mini documentary things were kind of like our focus, and also started doing some independent studies related to that. And then all my other time I really spent in the creative writing program with Linda Taylor. Like I had enough credits to be a creative writing major. And like I always sort of was balancing those two interests. So I guess I had that kind of like experience just from meandering and not doing what I was supposed to do. And so then when I got to Parsons, the program, I was in the design and technology MFA. So not even in the fine art MFA, but I don't know, through some conversations and my research on the program, I thought there was like more room to have a more focused kind of art expression and conversation, but it was really geared towards technology and like coding and web design and like more commercial arts in a way. And so that there was like a drastic disconnect, and that wasn't necessarily an interest for me. But again, I guess, which was my kind of intuition, I just kind of meandered into other departments. And I took most of my classes in the fine art department, but I didn't have a home in that department. And kind of moved throughout other spaces across the university, and just like, I guess, from showing up so much in the fine art department, faculty just started recognizing me, and then they're like, okay, come on.
That's pretty funny.
Yeah,
that's pretty funny. And they started assuming you were a fine. Yeah, that's really funny.
I went to like their events too sometimes, dinners that like a faculty would organize, and like didn't really know anybody in my department.
Well, one theme I would notice, I have noticed over the years, is, if you don't mind the compliment, I think you've been had to be, but also are very tough.
Mm-hmm.
And I think from the start, when you went to Parsons, and it's not the program you thought it was, and then your strategy to navigate around that, and then after you finished, you had to find strategies to survive as a young artist in a very expensive city.
Yeah.
And that does not always or even often work out.
That's very true.
And you have made it work.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about what some of that path was? I know at some point you were at the Studio Museum of Harlem as a job, but I don't know what between, what happened around that or before that.
Well, I mean, I think part of it too is like, this is maybe a meandering kind of response, and you can chime back in and ask me follow-up questions or more specifics. But like, I obviously got exposed to, creative practice and fine art in Oglethorpe, right? Taking these classes and like focusing on, the kind of the like pedagogical trajectory, right? Like, okay, learn drawing and painting. And then there was like I took photography, which now I can't remember.
Frank Hunter.
No, it was.
Segura?
Yes, Segura. Yeah. So like, I got exposure to those things, but also like, even at my time at Oglethorpe, I don't even think I went to the High Museum until much later living in Atlanta. So like, I just didn't have much kind of contact with, especially not contemporary art. And so when I moved to New York, I think even though I was like in this weird program and kind of like on the periphery, there just were more events, spaces, institutions, possibilities. And like, it wasn't like you had to know the thing to seek it out, right? Like you would just kind of clash into it. And so I started going to museums. I started like, understanding that, oh, there's a whole gallery world here. And I think in being able to see and consume and experience contemporary art, I think that also gave me a very, that was a kind of tangential education. And so I think that really helped because I started to like physically and tangibly see possibilities. And that also being an artist, like obviously I knew Alan was an artist, but I'm like, that's the only guy I know that's an artist, and that's a profession. So I was like, I like him, but like that must be an exception. Like I have to find a job. But then I started.
That is so interesting.
Yeah.
I spent my life avoiding those jobs.
Yeah. And so I started being, I guess, introduced to more creative people and more artists. And so then, just like in my imagination, I could see possibility.
Wow.
Yeah.
When did you start working at the Studio Museum?
2013. So I got there because while I was in Parsons, I was taking a class in the education department. There's a really amazing woman I just like kept having follow-up conversations with about like teaching. And then, like normally found odd jobs. So I worked in the admissions department at Parsons for undergraduate admissions. Then I started working with a high school program that was to help facilitate art opportunities and experience and exposure for students who were interested in creative fields. So like a mentorship plus like a practical kind of pathway to Parsons if they wanted to go there. And then I taught in the Saturday, like teaching, like art program at Parsons. And then it slowly, so then I started like amassing this education related experience. And it slowly trickled out. Also, like, you know, I was in a 2-year program, so about to graduate and like, okay, it's time to find a job again. And obviously, of course, I still worked at Starbucks forever. Like Starbucks has been my like a sibling. I worked at Starbucks when I was going to Oglethorpe too. So like I always had that.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that. That kept you fully caffeinated so you could keep working hard.
Yeah, literally.
And then what was the job you had at the Studio Museum of Harlem?
I started off as the education assistant. So just admin support to the entire education department. And then like, you know, managing some part-time kind of freelance educator staff. And then it transitioned to education program coordinator, which was sort of specifically managing group tours and pedagogy and putting together like a review system for our freelance educators. And then because I did a fellowship at MoMA that was in their teens museum education department, I basically created a kind of altered version of that program for Studio Museum because, you know, obviously it's a mission specific institution. So to think about another opportunity to give access to people. And so I created that and ran that at the Studio Museum for, I guess, I worked there 3 years.
So you had to think on your feet the whole time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And all the while, were you creating art while you're doing all of this?
No, I would say no, but I mean, barely, right? Like I was still kind of like tinkering with video because, you know, my laptop is compact and I had that and I could take that anywhere I went. I like couldn't even begin to think about or dream about a studio. But I think, especially once I started working at Studio Museum, because it felt more stable, even though I still had multiple part-time jobs while I was working there, I just had a different level of conversation with my colleagues. And so then slowly I started like, you know, thinking about and just kind of tinkering with the video stuff more. And, you know, it always was serious to me, but I still didn't know that there was some end goal to be an artist or that was a possibility again. Like, it's just like a hard thing to imagine and like believe.
I think this is one of the more amazing aspects of the opportunity to talk to you because it looked to me in hindsight, it looks to me like you're a heat-seeking missile. You go to New York, you find exactly what you want, and you do it.
Not at all. I stumbled into it. Like I kept trying to figure out a job that paid enough that I can just work that one job, right? Pay my rent and eat and like enjoy some things. Like I kept, okay, what is the career? But I was like, I'm this creative person. So maybe it's like, you know, a career somewhere creative. And I kept trying to find that thing, but everything I found was like, okay, I work 4 jobs. Like I literally, when I worked at Studio Museum, there was 1 year where I worked 7 days a week because I had 3 other part-time jobs because that's like, it's just an impossibility. And also it's a nonprofit institution. Like,
wow. Well, I have a question. When I ran into you at Volta, that was the first time for those who are joining us. That is one of the big art fairs in New York on the piers on the Hudson River. And it'd been a long time since I'd seen you. And that was such a surprise. And the work you had there was so beautifully presented and so sophisticated. So somewhere between this time period and that, you found a way not just to make art, but some very ambitious personal and technically ambitious in terms of the printing and the presentation. So a lot happened in there. How did that happen?
Yeah, I think one, being exposed to contemporary art. So just being able to see a lot more art, right? And to have like, you know, sometimes have, you know, access to, you know, the people who are making it or just to sort of hear about it, right? Like you go to a gallery, there could be and even if I didn't know it, like there might be 50 artists in a room, but you just overhear people talking about things and you're like, okay, something's interesting there, right? So part of it was this kind of like visual information. And then I think once I was working at Studio Museum, like having this different kind of community of people I was in relation to, and, you know, kind of talking about my interest in art and just like obviously what we were presenting there, like more and more people started encouraging me to apply to residencies.
Okay.
And so I think it is like the residency circuit was actually my real MFA, honestly. And so going to residencies where, you know, I had this kind of like dedicated blip of time to focus on something or got some kind of resource. And then I started doing longer residencies. And I think the work that you saw and that you're mentioning, I was either still in the Fine Arts Work Center residency, which is a 9-month residential residency in Provincetown. In Provincetown, I either was still in it or just coming out of it. And that was the time period that's where I produced that work.
So for those of us who've joined us who may not know about residencies, these are various places, Yaddo, McDowell, Provincetown, and some of them give a stipend, some don't, but it's
an apartment.
Yeah. What?
I said some of them give an apartment or a studio. Yeah.
And so that ended up being a really important opportunity for you to start focusing on making.
Yeah, definitely.
Wow.
I wouldn't have been able to do it, I think, without that. Like I just started like applying to things and all of the opportunities like started growing and then some happened at the same time, which gave me a push.
So just kind of going off of this residency application process, I know that with artists, actors, you know, people who are creative, they are always seeking opportunities and they face a ton of rejection. Is that something that you've had to deal with at all?
Of course. But the thing about me.
Yeah, like I want to know about that.
Yeah,
it's like, how do you bounce back from rejection?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, of course. Yeah. And I would say like the thing about me and just like, I guess my personality in general, like the like not getting something or the rejection, right? Which it is a rejection letter, but I also, I kind of put that in quotation marks because I talk to my students about this all the time, right? I never took it as a rejection or a kind of like hit, like I never felt I don't know, self-conscious or like, I don't know, I never got like upset about it. I just like figured it was a numbers game. I'm like, I'm doing this thing over here. And if I apply to something, if I get it, that's great. And I'll follow that. If I don't get it, nothing has changed over here. And then I just realized like just kind of like being a keen observer and like listening and having conversations with people that like, you know, when you apply to things also, there's a panel of people who are looking at it, becoming familiar or being introduced to you. And if you don't get that one opportunity, which like maybe 500 people apply to and they can only pick 3, somebody is still seeing somebody is being introduced to you that might not have known you before. And like, there are all kinds of serendipitous opportunities that come out of, you know, that exposure later on down the line. So I'm like, it's almost like a mini commercial or pitch, right? Like other people who will never see my work somehow in that moment get to see it. And then who knows what will happen. And then, you know, also a fair amount of opportunities I did get. And I think when I was about to graduate from Parsons, like this is just about a job, but I was trying to get a job and I made a spreadsheet. Like I would just go online every day and look at listings and I probably applied to 150 jobs and maybe I got 3 part-time things that I could put together temporarily. And I was just like going through and I was like, okay, yes, no, scratch it off. Like just keep rolling for the next one.
I'm exhausted just thinking about it.
Yeah.
Because rent, I mean, for anybody who hasn't lived in New York's great if you're not under pressure to pay rents and, you know. And
it's great if you're rich.
Yeah, it's great, unfortunately. But otherwise you have to do a lot of figuring out. Yeah. When you went to the residencies, did you meet people like other curators and other artists? I would think it was possibly an important opportunity for that too.
Yeah, absolutely. And particularly other artists who are kind of like my peers and became friends too. And like, I learned a lot from them too, because these are like in these residencies too, it was a lot of people who, you know, went to, you know, the top sort of art MFA program. So I'm kind of getting this perspective and like just understanding, you know, I guess either what professional development kind of conversations they were having from their institutional space and how that aligned with what I knew or what I didn't know. So like, I don't know, it's like this kind of constant education. And then, you know, having a community of artists and creative people, right? Like once you're sort of immersed in the community, it's easier to, I guess, find like acknowledge that as your identity as well, right? Like if I'm only in this world just working constantly, you know, it's easy to sort of get distracted from it or not have I don't know, motivation or even inspiration. So I think also opening up and having that community help with that too.
I can imagine. Nicole, I don't want to dominate. Are there questions? I know I want to ask some questions about this very powerful body of work that I saw first at Volta.
Mm-hmm.
And, but I want to also give some people opportunities to talk, or Sable, for you, have an opportunity to show any of the work you'd like to show us.
Oh, wow. See.
Well, I do have some questions in the Q&A. This is from Dr. Lisa Conley. She's the Assistant Director of Career Development. She asks, how did your Oglethorpe experience help you make a pivot to education, even though you knew you would continue your career as an artist?
That's a good question. I mean, I think two things happened. Oglethorpe provided a beautiful contrast for me because, you know, I was a kind of untraditional student. So I went to a couple of universities before I ended up coming to Oglethorpe, and then went through like a public school system where I didn't have that much access to art classes or just art exposure. So Oglethorpe was really a pivotal moment where I was starting to get this art education, right? So I think that's one thing, but then also I don't know how I would describe it. I guess maybe the kind of philosophy of Oglethorpe was so, I don't know, open and caring. And it was like about a different type of generosity too, right? Like even me not following any of the rules and taking classes that I'm supposed to take, or like, I don't know, listening to advising, right? Like they always found a way to listen to what my need was and support that, even if I needed to sort of pivot in some way. So it was like, I tell people all the time, and like even my mother knows, like she's always praising Oglethorpe and literally Alan Lowell, because it was like such a transformative moment and like landing point for me, even though I kind of like, you know, took a minute to sort of move through it. But I think it is something about maybe the philosophy of education that I could sense and feel from Oglethorpe that I didn't have language for and didn't sort of seek out while I was there, that in retrospect, I kind of stood back, especially as I started getting more serious about education, and looked at the landscape of my education and how like lost and how I felt like there was such a deficit outside of Oglethorpe, and what like I felt like my needs were as a student who were sort of moving through these spaces. And in contrast with Parsons, I think I kind of started thinking about, you know, pedagogy as this space of care too. And I think that's a kind of methodology that I've developed working across various institutions, and something that feels very important to me. And why it also feels important to me that, like, you know, I always participate in education in some capacity. Like, you know, who knows if I'll be a full-time professor forever, but I think I always need to engage in some way where there is, you know, mentorship, support, and just like a sharing of experience and network and knowledge, but not in these ways that feel, you know, overly academic or rigid, like this is knowledge production, you know, thinking about, you know, what else is, and what are other experiences one can bring into the room that we should acknowledge and validate outside of, you know, what our curriculum or what book we're interested in introducing a student to.
Quick question to follow up on that, and then back to Nicole. Do you feel like to be a working artist in academia, I've always navigated that potentially uncomfortable relationship. I would never say I'm an academic. I'm a painter who teaches. Does that sound like a familiar dilemma to resolve, or is Columbia already a pretty supportive place to be a working artist?
Yeah, I mean, I think I definitely identify with you, Alan. Like, and also because, you know, art education is like studio-based education too is so different than like what happens in the other disciplines, right, on a campus. So there always is like these sort of weird tension points. And I think, you know, I've worked in a number of like different types of colleges, schools, universities, art schools, liberal arts spaces. So that there's something different amongst all of them. But I think that, or what was I going to say? Like, yes, and I guess so. Columbia does have like a very kind of like prestigious graduate program, right? So part of the way that that program functions is, they are interested in, full-time working artists, people who are sort of a part of the ongoing kind of like conversation at the moment. And so because that is the caliber of faculty that they're interested in, right? There is a built-in mechanism of support in that, but I think that the kind of legacy of the academic institution in general still is at odds with, the type of person that one wants to bring in. So there is this kind of constant negotiation, I think, and it is a difficult balance, right? That's why I feel like, you have to really be committed to it and have a reason for being there to kind of, jump into that space, because it can be hard to negotiate at times.
That sounds very familiar. Are you enjoying the teaching?
Yeah, I love the teaching. That's
this will be on YouTube, so that was a tricky question.
Yeah.
Nicole, any other some follow-up questions?
No, I'd love to just get into talking about your recent works. I mean, they're just really powerful. So I just love to know, like, kind of your history with your, art creating process, and then like all of your experiences. How did that inform you to like be who you are today?
Okay, big question.
I mean, that's a big question. So we can do it like in sections. We can talk about a specific work, like the coloring pages. I'd love to just talk about that.
Yeah, okay. I could talk about that, but I guess maybe, because I think this maybe gets to your kind of material question, right? Like one thing that feels interesting and also kind of like maybe liberating for me, and like things that like my colleagues sometimes don't have like the freedom to do, right? Like I didn't come out of, Yale MFA's program. So there's a lot of pressure and like what people, how they build conversations around their practice, what they think they should be making, what they can't make. There's all these kind of start-stops. I mean, that's like a kind of like reductive or generalization, but there are those moments, right? And especially like, if people, get kind of grounding in a medium, right? Like the freedom they feel like they have to move out of that sometimes is a little fraught, even if it's just self-imposed. And I feel like, I mean, on the one hand, I feel like I have a complete freedom because the way that I came into my art practice, like as a professional, right, was in these kind of, I don't know, in these like scrappy ways, right? Trying to figure out what possibility I had in what moment. So when I'm working full time, like I start to focus more on video, right? Because I have my laptop and that was easy. And it's also something that I love to do. And I think when I started at Oglethorpe, I was really, really interested in and invested in narrative filmmaking, right? Like, eventually making a long form feature film, right? But that takes a different type of resource, crew, like people, everything, right? And so when I was living in Brooklyn at that time, working at Studio Museum, I'm like, I want to make video, I'm interested in film, but I also don't have the time to, even if I wrote a script, go out and pull together the actors and the crew to shoot it. So I started working with appropriated material, right? Because that was something that was easy. I can download things all over the place and then just manipulate like the image or manipulate the sound and start to create these collages that like, are very reminiscent of, the way that I was thinking about poetry in Linda Taylor's class, right? So like all of these, I guess, academic and creative interests started slowly coming to the surface. And then it was about necessity. So I can make that at the moment because, it didn't cost anything. And it was an opportunity to still be engaged. And I think that, slowly then mediums started sort of introducing themselves to me or sort of branching out when I had the opportunity or I had either a grant or a residency and there was like, I don't know, a laser printer there. And then I'm like, oh, okay, let me think about photography in a different way, And so I think it was about this type of necessity and seeing what was available that really shaped and kind of honed my art practice. And then now, obviously, with having more resources, more possibilities, right? I really think about, I guess, this kind of material histories. So how I can find a material that has enough content or weight in it that is similar to or creates an interest in dialogue or tension with the actual subject matter or the concept that I'm interested in. And so I'm following materials in that way. And it still is from that, kind of survival logic, even though I have more freedom and possibility in that, I think.
When you started doing the work about your father, Can you, do you mind telling us when that idea came to you and how it started? And anything you'd want to add? Do you mind showing an example of that? Like one of those
See, you
multiple
should tell
panel?
me to put some slides together. I'm like, let me.
No, you can drop a link in the chat and then
Oh,
our
a link.
leaders
Okay, a link
yeah,
is
we
better.
can
I
do
was like,
that.
I need to look for an image on my computer. Okay, sorry, you all.
Because on the one hand, as I remember, they were very beautifully presented and seemingly emotionally cool, but the topic is not emotionally cool at all.
Oops.
Is this a video piece?
No, I think you're talking about these suede photographic works.
Yes.
They like have this black space around them. Sorry, I couldn't like do technology and talk at the same time.
I can't.
Yeah, so for those of you who are tuned in live, Sable just dropped the link to her work that Lowell is referring to.
Yeah, that's a like selection of work. But let's see, I guess to the first question, when did I started making work about my father? I mean, I think it's interesting too, because I think, you know, people ask me, I guess, questions around the content all the time, because my father's incarcerated. And so I make a fair amount of work that deals with, you know, thinking about both my understanding of incarceration through the experience of having an incarcerated parent. And so, you know, how I've literally moved through those spaces, and then, you know, stepping back from it and looking at it from a larger sort of socio-political context, and then sort of speaking to that. Right. And sometimes there are overlap and sometimes those things are separate. And so like people ask a lot about, and I think especially like, you know, when the works feel more personal or even are perceived to be sort of more personal or projected, right? Like if it's like a difficult to deal with or to sort of work through or make. And this is just like a kind of long-winded way to say, like, I think I started thinking about the condition of my father and my proximity to it and what its reach or effects are both on me and how that sort of moves outward in, again, Linda Taylor's class, because I started dealing with, you know, the content for creative writing because it was the easiest. I mean, obviously like a multitude of reasons, right? Like that was the easiest thing I could access. And probably at the moment there was a need for me to access it. So it's like, I've been writing fiction, writing nonfiction, writing poems, like these kind of fragmented essays since what, 2006?
Right.
About my father's.
That's fascinating that through creative writing, the seeds had been sown already.
Yeah.
You've been reflecting on it for quite a while.
Yeah. So the work it had been working and worked and processed and looked at from all these different angles, and like language and many forms and syntax and sort of materials were created. And then like many years later, here comes this kind of visual practice. And so, I mean, of course, like, you know, it was still something that was in there. And, you know, I hadn't necessarily had this other kind of creative output in between then. So it was like kind of natural content to bring up. And I think I think some of the first works were definitely like thinking about that hyper sort of personal experience. But then I started thinking about, you know, a physical object and actual materials and, you know, what are all the other possibilities in that? So this thing about like thinking about material histories, and then, you know, this is in a public space. So now it's about the collective viewing of it. And like, you know, just I started to build a kind of intellectual, I think, engagement and framework around it. And then that was another space to continue to explore and make work from.
Wow. Nicole, are people able to look at that link?
Yes,
And
I just reshared it. So yeah.
So if anybody has a chance, people have a chance to see them and have a question, then
yeah, like if you guys want to take a minute and, you know, take a look at the work and respond to it, please do so. In the meantime, I do have 2 more questions from students. Jack asks, Sable, thanks for coming to speak. How did you make the decision to commit to Parsons as a soon-to-be postgraduate? What advice do you have for searching for the right graduate program with the creative field?
That's a good question. I mean, that also is a question that I talk to a lot of people about. I think like actually the decision is hard because there's so many factors and also barriers in it. Like obviously the financial one is huge. And I think especially right now, and just thinking about, you know, this sort of like a conversation around student debt, it really is like, you know, serious to research and think through like, what places you decide to interact with and like what is going to be the impact of what you're sort of left with. Because there are a lot of programs also that like, maybe aren't the most flashy programs, but like either have full scholarships or more scholarship money or teaching assistantships. They're just like, and thinking about like, you as an individual and what types of creative things you're interested in making, and then what kind of resources you need for that in this moment, right? Because that's one thing that prompts us to go to graduate school. And then what do you need while you're in graduate school and potentially outside of it, right? So if you make something hyper specific, maybe it's you need a program that has, this type of equipment, right? And so you go there for that. But I think, it doesn't always have to be the kind of obvious like top 5 choices of like, where I should go to school, because there's so much dedicated faculty and people who are interested in really thinking about and sort of helping hone and support careers that are in a number of places that might have I don't know, just one, better financial support and just like other types of things to sort of look for than the obvious, I guess. And then the decision that I made to commit to Parsons was like completely haphazard. Like I got an idea in my head to go to New York because in some ways that, had nothing to do with the place and also everything to do with the place. I was feeling like, I don't know, like in a stasis in Atlanta. And that was just because I think I kind of got stuck in like multiple full-time jobs and couldn't find a kind of outlet out of that. And so part of what creates possibility is change. So I was like, I'm actually just going to take a leap and try to get some serious change right now. And so that was geographic change. And so I was like, looking around at a bunch of places. I didn't only apply to schools in New York, but I really was interested in that geographic location. Just like I could perceive, because I didn't know for sure, that there was a lot of possibility and things that I could learn from the location and not just the school. And then, it also was, I got into Parsons. I didn't get into a lot of schools either, like, just like realistically. And it seemed like there was like, I think also I was still dangling this idea that I had to find a career too. So I was like, this program at Parsons, it seems like I can do creative stuff, but then it seems like they're going to prep me for a career. And then when I got there, it was very different, but it also was just like kind of out of naivety. So, and sometimes, I mean, that is what happens. You kind of have to follow, a path that unfolds in front of you. And then once you're in it, like, learn as much as possible from the condition that you're at and trying to figure out, how could I use this strategically and to get somewhere else to keep moving forward, right?
I mean,
So basically, it's easy.
Go ahead.
Oh, it's not easy.
Piece of cake, right?
I did not describe anything easy here.
No, really, you really forged your own path, and it's just really admirable. And
by bumping around,
Right. I mean, it's not easy choosing an artist's life. We do have another question from a student. How would you describe a successful artist? Your perspective of rejections leading opportunities from people still seeing you is something I resonate with and want to know how you define being a successful artist to yourself and when viewing others.
Mm-hmm. Good question. Also a question I ask my students all the time, because they always ask me this, like, oh, but I want to be successful. And I'm like, okay, well, what does successful mean to you? Like, being an artist is like incredibly idiosyncratic, right? So it's like, you know what your desires are and what you're interested in making and why you're interested in making it, right? Like we all have a different kind of impetus for making things, right? Some people it's like, I have to process these things, or it's therapeutic, or, I just need to do things with my hands, or there's all these reasons why we have to make things, right? And I think like, trying to get to this sort of answer of success, I think is really kind of taking stock of like, what you need as an artist, how you define yourself as an artist, what that looks like for you, because, just, having shows at every gallery also doesn't mean you're a successful artist if there's something that is missing from you, right? Like if you want to have intellectual, rigorous conversations around your artwork, and that's the thing that really excites you, but, the gallery is just selling your work and you don't have conversations, then it's like, do you personally define that as a success for yourself? And so I think like it really is kind of trying to find like, what is it that motivates this and why, and, what kind of keeps it. I guess maybe one measure of success, right, for an artist is, how can they make their practice sustainable, right? Like, how can you make the art practice continue to develop and sustain itself, and you as an individual in it too, right? Because those things aren't necessarily separate. I don't necessarily think that like, if you're able to like, make a living and like only pay for everything by your art practice, that is the sort of obvious definition of success. It can be for one person, but like I just said, like, I do have a professional art practice. I have a gallery, so I do make some income off of artwork, but it's also important to me to participate in the education space. So success for me is also, maintaining these two identities and being able to work with younger emerging artists and be able to be a mentor for people. And so there is a possibility maybe I could stop teaching and just live off of my art, the income from artwork, but that doesn't feel like a success for me and my identity as an artist. I need both of those things together.
Great answer.
Yeah, no, really, it's awesome.
I think I saw a question from Tyler.
So Tyler did want to know, I think he missed the first part. Was it Tyler? No question from Tyler. He just needed the link.
Okay, they pop up and then they disappear, so I don't know. I would like to know if people have been able to see your coloring book work. I'm not sure that's what it should be called. What do you call them?
Yeah, the coloring book series.
Okay. First time I saw them, it was, I guess, I don't know if it was an article online or in somewhere, but they knocked me flat. I just thought they were so powerful. And that was even before I could read them. And then I read them and it was like, damn, brick in the head here. And can you, as a painter, part of me really responds to those. I hope it's not just that part of me, but because I do paint. There's an eloquence to the boldness of your language with them. How did you, I didn't know you had that. I never saw that while you were here.
I didn't know I had that either. I think I learned that from you. Like once you said that,
I wasn't fishing, I promise.
No, I started visualizing some of those paintings of like the dogs, like the blur, like I remember your work.
That's so crazy.
Yes.
When I saw it, I had no idea she could do that.
Yeah.
I had no idea, because I thought you did photography and video and spoken word, and they knocked me flat. Now you've gotten, that's what was at the Guggenheim Museum, right?
Yes, that was what was at the Guggenheim. Yeah. I didn't necessarily, I didn't know that I had that in me either, right? And so once I started like going to residencies or becoming like more a part of this kind of like art community, art world conversation too, like, there's people that's like, I'm a painter. I went to Yale for painting. I'm like, I don't know nothing about that. I'm like, I can barely make anything look 3D when I was.
I don't know what I am.
Alan Lowell.
Well, that is so funny.
So I'm like, yeah, definitely I'm not a painter. I like never thought I was going to go buy a roll of canvas or anything. And then that series is completely serendipitous, right? Like this is when I still worked at Studio Museum, took a lunch break or probably just took like a break or whatever. And, went strolling around Harlem and I saw this coloring book on the ground, which also is a kind of like, just weird serendipity and timing.
Sign from the universe.
Yeah, if you live in New York, you don't pick up anything off the ground. It's a dirty place. Okay, it is terrible here, actually.
Rats everywhere.
And so I just somehow reached down and picked, and I'm also like a cleanliness fanatic. So I just picked up this thing off the ground and I go back, like I get a coffee, I go back to my desk and I'm just like casually flipping through it and then was horrified. But this was like, I don't know, maybe 2014 I found it. And then, I just like, there's some weird object that I just like kept traveling with. So like I would go to a residency, I bring the object with me.
That one coloring book.
The one coloring book, and it had been colored already. So it was lost by some child. And so like I would go to a residency, set it on my desk, but like, not even like look at it so much anymore. Just like, there's my talisman.
That's such a great story. You couldn't make one up that's better than that.
Yeah. And then I go somewhere else and I bring this thing with me. And then 2016 or 17, maybe 2016, who knows, somewhere around there. I had a show that I was sort of finalizing with the Queens Museum. And it was a solo show that came out of this like fellowship that they had. So I had like, had the idea of and was like making like, probably 4 key works and talking to the curator about it, right? But something was missing because it was like a big space. And I was like, okay, I have these works and I know these are the anchors, but something is wrong, right? Like there's something missing. I don't have a show yet. I don't know what it is. And so I just started thinking more and more about like, what the concept for the show was, what the other works were doing. And somehow, like literally just the coloring book came to my mind. And I was like, so let me go back and revisit this. And then I started making kind of quick conceptual decisions. I was like, scale is one of them.
Because they're big, they're comparatively big.
Yeah, I came to the oil stick, right? Only because I was thinking about gesture and mark making and still like, obviously like, in this world of coloring. So not like thinking specifically about painting, but like that also is like a saturated pigment, right? Like I can just use it. It's not about mixing. It's not about, this other thing I have. And I was like, also when I first made them working with such a limited palette too, I was just like, okay, let's just go primary for this moment. And like, maybe like some graphite. And really thinking about mark making, but then, I kind of knew a little bit intuitively, but like also learned over the series because I've made like 80 of these by now, like, the way that the pigment sort of set on the paper, because I was using this heavyweight watercolor paper and like screen printing the base image. So there's like, how that ink functions and just like the kind of tactility that you can get from this oil and kind of caked on top of each other, and that having this kind of like visceral relationship. And I think as I started making more, it just became more and more refined. And then I started, I think the first 4 that I made and then 2 went in the show was like, I know this is an image conceptually that makes sense to kind of complete this show. And then I like, I didn't know anything else yet. And then once it was up, I was like, okay, painting, okay, drawing, okay, mark making. Now let me kind of revisit these and like, let them kind of sit with me. And then I became more sophisticated, I think, in, what the possibilities were for them as art.
When did the words, I saw some that have, there's one that was very powerful. A white lady did this, and then I said, fuck you, right?
Yeah. I mean, that also literally happened. It's just like, I just go out in the world and I just look and I listen. I'm like, oh, look at that over there. Okay, write that down. And
wow.
Then, in the moment of like thinking about a show or thinking about some series together, then it's like, oh, remember that thing from Santa Fe? That's what you need here. Yeah.
Fascinating. I wish we could have one on the screen while we're talking. We can't do that, can we?
What?
Can we have one of those on the screen while we're talking?
I think we can. I can share my screen and see.
Would you? Could you?
Yeah.
And we'll still hear you talk, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Oh goodness. Are you seeing my email or are you seeing?
I see an image. This is where the jury sits.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the one you're showing?
Yep.
Is this an early one, Sable?
It's 2020.
Yeah. So, no.
So it's pretty big. It's what, 60 by 50 inches?
Yeah, 60 by 50 inches.
Yeah, and so you did silk screen of the black.
Of the black, yeah. So the outline and the text is all silk screen.
And is this a reference to your father, the jury?
So the first book I found, right, was like about, teaching children how to navigate the court system. And so I started like making a bunch from that book. And then as I started playing around more and more with like the possibility of this series, then I started to research, there must be other books that exist like this, that are either made by, like a state, like municipal groups or nonprofits. And so this one is from another book. And I think that like what became interesting to me is like the repetition of certain pages, but then, the kind of narrative that can happen with, this page next to another courtroom scene or the jury. So they start to create these other kind of like narratives or phrases or something. So that's how I kind of use them.
Nicole, can you find the one that ends with, starts with a white woman said, does that sound right, Sable?
Yeah.
And it ends with,
I got it.
Say, fuck you. Can we find that one? Because it's both angry and hilarious and tragic.
Yeah, because
I
it's
mean,
absurd. Because the
we're
whole
in this-
experience was absurd.
Sadly, this is the time we're in.
Yeah.
And you couldn't have guessed how timely that would be, even when you did it, could you?
Yeah. No.
You could feel it because it was going on in 2018 still,
Mhm.
but it's just more timely than ever, isn't it?
Mhm.
To the so this is from you. It's like a letter from you to the white lady.
Yes.
So it's a letter from you to the white lady in Santa Fe.
Yeah.
Who told me that she squeezes her white granddaughter's hand every time. And
She's-
someone actually told you this?
Yes. And she grabbed my hand. This happened at an art opening in Santa Fe for the Site Santa Fe, like biennial thing. And random people will come up to talk to you. And sometimes it's weird, sometimes it's awkward, sometimes it's nice, but you just you humor it, or you never know what's going to happen. So a lady came up, she was like, I have to talk to you. I've been trying to talk to you. And I was like, okay, hi. And she said a few things about art, and then she started telling me this story, and then she grabbed my hand and squeezed it. And she said she squeezes her granddaughter's hand. And I was like, this is a weird, objectification and projection. I'm like, who am I in the story? Am I the big scary black man, or am I your white granddaughter that you're trying to protect from which you both are fetishizing me, right? This is interesting. And also just her entitlement to be able to come up to me, tell me the story.
Yeah, right. I mean, so many levels of weirdness and wrongness at one time. And then the ending of it, I don't know, can we see that one again, Nicole? When I just guffawed when I saw that.
Yeah.
What does it say? The assorted, the what artist?
Misgendered.
Misgendered artist. Was that part of the dialogue also?
It's hard to tell. Maybe in body language and affect, there's all these kind of cues that were there, but it was all even in the weird kind of projection of who am I that she is identifying with or reconciling in the story too.
And feels that you're somehow a convenient, familiar, somehow in her imagination, symbol that she can talk to this way. And not have any idea of what she's doing.
No.
Wow, there's so many levels to it. Yeah. Oh, this one's crazy. This is one of the ones I kind of remember of where the black is really bold, and at a distance, a row of these was really powerful and really good. And the first time you did a big one, you had to invest a certain amount of artistic and psychic energy. You had to take a leap when you printed the black.
Yep.
A sort of a leap of faith, didn't you?
Yeah.
That I don't know what I'll do with these when I get them, but I'll figure it out.
Yeah, it was just it was all impulse. There was some kind of thread that was happening in the things that I had already determined for the show and the works that were further along, and I was like, I don't have anything else. Also, I know something, and it felt like, okay, here it is. And so, I only got 4 of them printed too, because that was the resource that I had at the moment, and I was like, okay, I know it also space-wise, I'll need 2 of these. Let's see what happens. And
I have a question. The first time you took a paint stick, which I'm a big fan of in the right moment.
Yeah.
For those who don't know, they're oil paint, but they're mixed with wax. And they are kind of big. And so they go from big to pretty big, even bigger. And they are limited in color in terms of assortment. And you kind of peel off the waxy surface from the last time you used it, and then it's comparatively soft. And it's luscious, and it's like an enormous fantasy of what a crayon should be. Right?
Yeah.
Was it weird the first time you did one? Literally the first one you picked up that paint stick. Yeah. And you go, what the hell? I don't know what I'm doing. I'll do this.
Yeah. I mean, I had no plan. I did also the first time I did it was just very kind of frenetic, performative. It was just about trying to create these gestures and not even I'm going to sit down and think about the color palette. Right. So it literally was a kind of embodied response. And then also I'm left with this thing, and I'm like, okay, but is this is this going to be seriously considered as art in relationship to this, right? There's those kind of, I guess, anxieties about I am using a paint stick. So, technically it's a painting, but the painters will argue with me, and all of these kind of, I think, aesthetic blocks and conversations sort of came to the surface. But I was at this point also, I mean, luckily I had kind of the time constraint on my hands too. It's like, okay, send it to the framer. Here we go. Let's see what happens. Kind of.
Did you find, because I think all artists, one way or the other, can make rules for themselves somehow. Who knows where they come from? And one possible rule might have been, what am I doing? This isn't me, right? And where that rule comes from, I don't know. But does it sound familiar, Nicole?
Oh, yeah.
Like a painter who's
Imposter
doing a
syndrome,
sculpture.
right? It's called the term is called imposter syndrome. Yep. Where you're like, this is not who I am.
Yeah, this is not who I am. Although, who are we? I mean, we still don't know that, right? Now, so
it's always a process.
Yeah, so
it's always a work in progress.
Almost an hour. I want to give a chance for any. I've so enjoyed that. But are there any questions from our people?
So I think most questions have been answered. So if you are dying to ask her any more questions, now is the time. But to kind of close it out, I just want to like reflect on some of the things that you said. And I just really admire the fact that you've just taken your education kind of and made it your own. Like you really forged your own path, and where there wasn't an opportunity, you made space and you created an opportunity. And I just think that hard work does really pay off. I love that you stayed vigilant, that you stayed connected with other people, that you're a lifelong learner, not just in like an education setting, but like, I love that you just like go to museums and you're learning, you're absorbing, you are being exposed. Those are all learning tools. But yeah, so thank you so much for sharing with us. And, if you have any last words or, nuggets of wisdom for our student.
Oh my God.
No pressure.
Yes. Yeah, no pressure, but now is the time.
No, I don't know if I have wisdom.
Well, yeah, but I mean, any students, who are majoring in art, they have so many questions, right? The possibilities are limitless, but it's almost like paralyzing because it's so open.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, I guess like maybe some advice and probably something that I definitely like live by is like, don't cut off your possibility, right? Because there could be all these things that like make you feel like, oh, like it can't happen, or I don't know, someone said something negative to me, or, a teacher said, why are you doing this? Or like, this is not, this doesn't make sense, or, this is not the way that it's supposed to happen. I mean, we'll always hear some kind of barrier or block or negativity, like constantly, regardless of who we are, if we're successful or not successful, right? And I think that like, if an art practice is something that's really important to you, right? Like that is birthed out of your experience. And then what you learn are just tools to be able to process, what's the thing that brought you there in the first place, right? And so if you like, I guess, constantly kind of like remind yourself of that and ask yourself what that is, right? So like, there's a definition of art or artist that, other people will teach you. And then there's your definition, right? And both of those exist, and both of those can exist at the same time. And so I think like, just continuing to stay open and following those things, regardless of like, what you're seeing or hearing, right? Which is, I guess, a long-winded way to say, don't be discouraged, right?
No, truly, but I mean, that's what students need to hear. That's what I need to hear, like we could all use that. Yeah, so thank you so much. Well, any last words or any questions?
Yeah, just thank you so much, Nicole, for organizing this, and Sable, what a pleasure.
Yes.
And I just have been so proud of what you've been doing, and it's exciting to see what your art keeps going. I couldn't be more pleased.
Thank you.
Yes,
so
we're so proud of you.
great to be here. Thank you.